Thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Amjad Ayubi, and I'm a member of the Higher Education Advisory Council, also a member of the organizing team of HEDreamin. I'm delighted to welcome you to this session where we're going to learn about Salesforce and Qualtrics from the fabulous duo of Farrah Friedrich and Mike Walter from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. As you know by now, I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, which can be found to the right of the presentation. And now let me turn it over to the fabulous duo of Farrah and Mike.
Thanks, Amjad. Hi, I'm Mike Walter, and I've been at the University of St. Thomas for over 7 years. I got my Salesforce and CRM foundation start in the corporate world and returned to my alma mater as they were getting into Salesforce. Since then, I've been working with Farrah, and we have been busy. Like many universities, we started in Salesforce working with applications and prospective students, transforming processes and data. From there, we have led projects to pull in current student data and processes, starting small with academic alerts, to now Salesforce is our default easiest solution in this space. Finally, I have led projects to migrate many advancement functions into Salesforce, including our alumni community, alumni communications, and bringing our gift officers CRM to Salesforce. With each project, we become a more complete connected campus.
Hi, everyone. My name is Farrah Friedrich, and I'm the interim CRM director at the University of St. Thomas with Mike. I won't go through a lot of the same stuff because he already touched on everything we've been working on. But as you can see here, we do have a lot of things going on in Salesforce for supporting the full student life cycle. We're doing integrations and doing lots of really cool stuff. In addition to my work in Salesforce at St. Thomas, I also co-lead the Upper Midwest Higher Education User Group, which is a user group or a community user group that represents Minnesota, Wisconsin, North and South Dakota, and Iowa. And in addition to that, I'm also a Higher Education Advisory Council member. A little bit about our campus, if you haven't seen this slide already today. We do have 3 campuses. We have our primary locations in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then we do also have a campus in Rome, Italy. I always hope that I'll get assigned to a project there someday because it'd be beautiful to visit, but not yet. We have about 150 undergraduate majors and minors and about 55 graduate degrees that support our 8 colleges and schools. We also have about 10,000 plus or minus undergraduate and graduate students. What I don't have called out on this slide is we also transitioned this year from D3 to D1, which was a really big accomplishment for us and meant a lot of changes and a lot of things we've had to pick up in Salesforce to support that. And the other big announcement we've had on campus is we are beginning a School of Nursing, and our first class starts next fall. So that's been really exciting for us to try to tackle. If you did notice at the beginning of this presentation, I do want to apologize in advance for my work from home coworkers. That's Daisy, Charlie, and Raven. They do get a little noisy and like to interrupt. So hopefully they won't. They've kind of settled down. So just in case, I thought I'd show you the cute picture of them to beg for forgiveness ahead of time. So if your campus is like our campus, we had a lot of tools where people were collecting student data that ended up sitting in a third-party database or a spreadsheet on a desktop or who knows where else. And that made for some really messy, inaccurate, and time-consuming reporting. And especially as we moved into Salesforce, we wanted to keep asking those questions, but then be able to put that data together to make some informed decisions. And for us to do that, especially with all of those different sources, we had things like we were using Qualtrics. We had some departments using Google Forms. We had some custom web forms that were feeding to Oracle databases, SurveyMonkey, you name it. We had things out there collecting data. And we needed to take that data and put it together with Salesforce because that's where we have a lot of our support staff working to support students. But to do that was kind of not easy, right? We had to take that and then try to match it. And I ended up using Access databases, I still do all the time, to try to clean the data and get it so that we could move it into Salesforce and try to match it. And then you have problems with mismatches and whatever. So it just wasn't a reliable way to do it. And we knew that we had to find a better way, especially as more and more things were built into Salesforce. We wanted to make sure we were getting all of that data into that single source of truth so that we could make those informed decisions. The problem that we had, probably like also a lot of you, is we were juggling. We were juggling resources. We had time constraints. We had reporting needs that had to be met. We didn't always have the financial support to go out and buy, expensive integration tools or whatever. And we were also, again, manually merging that data together. For the so that wasn't great either. It wasn't ideal for our staff members who were trying to collect the data, and then it wasn't ideal for us when we were trying to cobble the data together to match it and get it loaded into Salesforce.
So with all the needs, the requirements, and considerations, we landed at using the Qualtrics Salesforce Extension. We had experience with Qualtrics dating back to 2018 when we started to use the web to lead mapping. It filled a space where our School of Education was using Qualtrics for event registration, but rarely moving that same data into Salesforce. And we were curious if this would meet those requirements and would be a fit. The web to lead mapping did help, alleviating a number of constraints that can still ring true without a true solution today. First, neither IT had the resources to spin up a site quickly, and the school didn't have time to wait. So Qualtrics provided that solution that was simple to use and produced a professional page. Qualtrics also provides an easy-to-use GUI that offers robust functionality like branching questions, along with data validations and standards. With this solution, we're able to let the business users run with their ideas, capture the data they'd like, use the language that they'd prefer without IT needing to be in the room. One of the most time-consuming actions that I see as a Salesforce admin can be creating fields and associated pick list values as our users change their mind or the text that they'd like to see. With Qualtrics, IT, again, is largely not in that space. With other form solutions, admins may have to build out these forms and code it at the same time, bringing back possible roadblocks and delays to a project. Furthermore, at St. Thomas, the cost of the add-on was not prohibitive as the Qualtrics application was familiar to many on campus. We already had an enterprise license agreement to create surveys. The add-on allowed us to simply map the data to other objects within Salesforce. As I mentioned, when we looked at other solutions, there were limitations to the number of users that could build the forms, and prices would jump as more admins were added. Our costs with this solution were controlled. Later in our presentation, we will discuss the data standards and validation tools that help us with data mapping and Salesforce data standards. Within this mapping task, we still utilize Salesforce admins to do that task at St. Thomas. Admins understand Salesforce data and can quickly eye solutions to keep everything in sync. So while that does take time on the IT and Salesforce staff, it is much easier to tackle that mapping as the survey is being finished and can often be repeated for future similar forms. Plus, I don't know if I would want the Salesforce admin function removed, as I would think we would get many more requests for new fields in Salesforce and data standards could get loose. I think this is similar reasoning to why we don't make all Salesforce users admins. So we've got the Salesforce, the Qualtrics Salesforce extension. What do we do next? First of all, we have another tool in our Salesforce admin toolbox. It is an option that we can use when evaluating and architecting a solution, especially when we're looking at front-facing, non-authenticated users entering data. And now we handle a variety of solutions, from simple, inserting a single record, to more complex that involve multiple surveys, record creations, updates, and triggered communications. I won't go through all of our use cases, but some examples are like simple tutor check-ins or alumni referrals to the very complex like major declarations and approvals. If a business unit comes to us and explains that they need a form out quickly and the data needs to end up in Salesforce, we check if we can do it all within Salesforce. If not, Qualtrics is our next solution that we bring up.
So I just want to touch on some of the options available with the Salesforce response mapping. It is actually pretty powerful what you can do. You can write or update to any object in Salesforce, standard or custom. So you can do inserts, updates, upserts, deletes, although I don't advise you do deletes, but that's a personal preference. And you can also post to chatter. There's a lot of flexibility in what data you can send. You don't just have to send the response. You can actually send the question text. You can pass specific hard-coded values. You can pass embedded data values, which we'll talk more about what those are in a minute. And then in relation to file uploads, when you have someone upload a file in response to a question, you don't just pass information about that file. You can actually pass in the file size, the name, and actually the URL of that file, which is extremely handy. And we'll talk more about it later. But one example use case for that is we have some students, current students, applying to a scholarship using a Qualtrics integration to Salesforce. And prior to that, the person who owned the survey would have to export the results out to a spreadsheet, and then he would have to download all the attachments and provide that information to the people reviewing the applications. And with using Salesforce, we're able to pass not just the responses to records that are related to the contact of that student that's applying, but also a link to that attached or that uploaded document, where that link can live right in the Salesforce record, and the person that's reviewing the application doesn't need to have access to that Qualtrics survey to see the response, because they have that link right in Salesforce, which is extremely handy. We also just wanted to touch on some of the lessons learned, because like any process, it's not perfect, and there are things that as we've used it more and more, we've learned things to do and things not to do. So the first thing I would advise is that only the person who authenticated the response mapping can save changes to that workflow. So you have your survey, and then with your survey you have workflows, and that's where you can set up all of the actions that happen when a survey, when somebody creates or starts or submits a survey. Your Salesforce response mapping is one of those workflows, and so the person who does that, and so as Mike alluded to earlier, we'll a lot of times have like the business user set up the survey, and then someone on the Salesforce team will actually do the response mapping. If Mike created the response mapping and then I try to go in and make a change to that, it'll break it, which is not ideal, but that's just the way that it works. In the same vein, only the person who authenticated the response mapping, so the person who set it up, can see the mappings. And I don't think that used to be the case. I think that's something that changed with a recent update to Qualtrics, but that's just a warning in if you're like us, where you have multiple people supporting that process. Only the person who set up that mapping is the one who can actually go in and see how the values and fields are tying together. We've run into an issue recently where someone from our team left, and he was the owner of a lot of these surveys or response mappings. And so they're running now, but if we have to make any changes, one of us will have to go in and rebuild those mappings. So it's just a word of caution to make sure you've documented what those mappings are if you're sharing responsibilities like that, so that you have that in case someone leaves or if somebody else has to make a change. Always try to do the mapping last. If your users are like our users, we get excited, they build, we set up the mapping, they change the survey, you're going to have to redo those mappings in some cases. So I would advise you to wait until they're really sure that that survey is ready to go, and then do your mapping last. One thing I forgot to mention, I'll jump back a bullet, is if your authentication changes, so like if you change your password or if you request a new token, you will need to go back into Qualtrics in those surveys that are mapped or that are using your authentication and just click the button to re-authenticate to make sure that that connection stays. Otherwise, you'll get some failures. Which leads me to my next thing to point out is always make sure in your survey and in your workflow that you're setting up both success and failure notifications. They're configured separately. I'll show you how to do that on the next slide. But they're extremely important. And what I do is I just have a rule in my inbox that they go to a folder. I have one folder for successes and one for failures. And so when I see something show up in that failure, I can go right away and see what's happening. And sometimes it's been an indication that maybe I changed my token and forgot to go re-authenticate my survey. So that's super important to do. One thing to note is on the success notifications, you can only have one person receive those, but you can have multiple people receive the error notifications. So if you're like our team, you might want to have a couple people that are on those notifications. We try to always share when we are working on a survey, we have it shared with everyone on our team so anyone on our team can support it. And the same for receiving notifications happen. To set up your notifications, there are a couple different places. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when you're in your survey, this is what the Qualtrics survey interface looks like. You have your survey that's on the first tab, and then the second tab is your workflows. And then within those workflows, you have all of your different actions broken out. And so in this case, I have a survey response and a response mapping. If I want to get those notification settings on a successful workflow and a failure, I would click on the three dots in both places. So the top set of dots is for when there's an error. So that's going to tell me anytime it runs into any error. And what's nice about that is it gives you actually some decent error messaging. So you can really troubleshoot back to what the issue is. And that'll send that right to your inbox. The other one is for anytime the response mapping completes. And that, again, is also really handy. We've had some cases where maybe something mismatched and we thought we had everything working. And then the response mapping came through and one value, like it still did the response mapping, but one value didn't come through. And so you're able to go back to those emails and you can see all the values that were passed, and then you can manually update that. So it's really nice to have those turned on. So to kind of switch gears a little bit, we'll talk about embedded data. And we have found these to be really one of my favorite things about Qualtrics. They're kind of like variables in Qualtrics. So you can set formulas, you can do system values like date stamps, timestamps, whatever. You can do concatenations of values. So you can take a response and then put that together with other information in the system, and you can pass that through in your response mapping. You can pass values to and set those variable values through a URL. So I'll show you that in just a minute, where you can actually have your embedded data field set up in your survey, and then when somebody clicks or accesses a link, and you have certain keys in that link that map back to that value field, so you can set that, and that's been extremely handy for us. You can use JavaScript in your survey to set embedded data values based on what they pick, and we'll talk about that in a minute. With embedded data fields, you can do data transformation. So the nice thing about that is how you're asking a question and the response you're getting in the survey does not necessarily have to have a one-to-one with what you have in your field in Salesforce where you want to send the data. So that's really nice for your users and also for your person filling out the survey, because sometimes, true false is not quite the same as explain it to someone answering a survey, but you might just need it to map over and check a box, right? So it's a better user experience. You can also use embedded data values for record matching. So as I mentioned, we pass some things through the URL. A lot of times we're passing record IDs or contact IDs, and that helps us to be able to match back to either the record that it's sending from, or when we're writing to Salesforce, we know what student or contact to tie that record to.
I'm going to do a little bit deeper dive into each one of these and show some examples on how we've used it in Salesforce and in Qualtrics. So looking at this one, I was looking for a solution to pass a survey summary to a single activity field in Salesforce. So the data that was not needed to be individually reportable. It was more of a summary and specifics on essay questions or question responses. And I was able to concatenate those values with an embedded data field formula, and then map those over to embedded data field to the activity description field in response marketing mapping. What's great about this solution is that we don't need to do that one-to-one survey response to Salesforce field relationship. This solution helped us establish a good precedent going forward for this process. In this slide, we highlight Qualtrics's native pick list recode functionality. We can change the pick list response to a corresponding number that can facilitate checkbox mapping or a number mapping behind the scenes. For example, if we state in a survey, are you a first generation student, with the values of yes, I am, and I'm not, yes, I am a first generation student and my parents did not attend college, or no, I am not, we can translate that to a 1 and 0 to map into a Salesforce checkbox field. We didn't have to bring over that entire language that we had within the Qualtrics survey. We can also use the recode function for a survey value associated to fit a ranking schema behind the scenes. So if we had 5 different values, but really it was a 0 for the first value, 2, 3, 4 type of value, we can map that over into Salesforce. In this example, we kind of put both of those previous components together in one. In an event registration form, we had both an in-person and online presence, and we also asked the registrants if they were attending the in-person, online, or sending regrets within one pick list question. On the back end, we wanted to associate that registrant to an in-person record if they selected the first value, or if it was the online event, we wanted that they select it, then we want that to a second value, to a second event and value. And finally, if they couldn't attend either, we wanted them to send regrets as their registration value, but assign that to the in-person session. So we're able to do that all within the recode pick list value, and able to transform a registration value from one of those values, and we transformed it to that numeric value first, giving it a 1, 2, 3 within the recode, and then we were able to assign a registrant value and an in-person to the in-person event. For the second one, we use the registrant value to the online event, and finally, in the third value, we were able to set the status of regrets and assign it to the in-person event. And we can build even more values to branch from here. Essentially, the sky is the limit, and all of this logic is done without essentially knowing JavaScript or any coding language.
So as I mentioned earlier, we're able to pass embedded data through the URL, which we have found to be invaluable. We're using it a lot. So I wanted to show in this example how, or one way that we're using it, and kind of show how it's mapped. So what I'm showing is for our drop-in tutor sessions. So as I mentioned, we moved to D1 athletics, and with that came a change. We have tutoring sessions tutoring offices all across campus. We're not centralized. So for D1, you have to track all student-athlete interactions with tutors, and we weren't doing that. We weren't tracking tutoring at all, really, prior to this. And this came up over the summer, where we had to have it in place for fall. So what we ended up doing is creating a Qualtrics form where a student can click on this link, and this is from the My Actions section of our intranet, which is where students can go. And this link shows for any current undergraduate student. They can click on that link, and it's passing in the URL the Qualtrics survey link. So it's not a personalized link per se. There's an option in Qualtrics where you can generate a list of personalized links based on contacts that you've created in Qualtrics. With this solution, we don't have to do that. Anyone can click on the link and we can pass information through that URL so that we know who they are when they do the survey. So in this case, because they're in our intranet, we know who they are, and we have the contact ID, the Salesforce contact ID, as one of the unique IDs in our intranet. So whenever they're in there, we can get to that Salesforce ID, and therefore we're able to embed that into the URL. And so we're passing through, in this case, to who ID, which is just the name that I gave the embedded data field. You can set it to whatever you want. We're passing that contact ID on the end of the Qualtrics URL string. And then as soon as that student clicks that link and opens that survey, it's populating that value or setting that variable value behind the scenes in Qualtrics. So then what we're doing with that later is passing that through in the response mapping to the record to be able to relate that record we're creating in Salesforce to that contact record. So we're able to see all of those tutor check-ins for that particular student. In the screen capture, you can also see that I set some other static data in embedded data, like the start time, end time, a timestamp, those kinds of things. So you can do those things in embedded data as well. And then I'm also concatenating some data together. So for example, in the subject, they're responding in the survey and picking a department, and they're picking a tutoring session duration, so 15, 30, whatever minutes. And I'm concatenating that data together to do the subject of the record that I'm creating in Salesforce with the response mapping. The other option that we found for doing this, so if you don't have a link somewhere that you want to, like a clickable link you want to put out somewhere, we can do this through email within Salesforce. So obviously we have the contact ID in Salesforce, so you can build a dynamic link in your template pretty easily. When I first started doing this, I wasn't aware that I could do it this way. So I was thinking I would have to create a formula field on the objects that I was sending the survey with that survey link. But I figured out you can actually build it within the email template itself, so you don't have to have that extra field. So as I'm showing in the screen capture, the format is pretty simple. You've got your Qualtrics URL, and then you have your embedded data variable name, and then equals, and then your Salesforce field, and so on and so forth. So in this example, I mentioned earlier that we're having some current students apply for scholarships using a Qualtrics survey that's feeding back to Salesforce. So I'm pulling data from our application object. And so you can see in my specific example, I have the Qualtrics survey link, and then I want to pass through the Salesforce ID of the contact. So then pulling that field in right from the fields that I would use in the email template, and then the first name and the last name. So, and by doing it this way, you can hide the link to the student, right? So you just see the nice scholarship application link text, but they know it's a link because it's blue and it's underlined. And when they click on that, it's going to the right place. So to kind of change gears a little bit, another thing that we found is as more and more people found out we could do this, there were a lot more surveys that they wanted to have integrated to Salesforce. And for some that are more recurring, we have them going to a specific custom object. So for example, we do student withdrawals within Salesforce. And when a student withdraws from the university, we have an email that kicks out from Salesforce that has a link to a survey where we want to ask them some additional questions about their withdrawal. That one is writing back when they respond. It goes right back to that same object that triggered it. But sometimes we have more of a one-off survey, like we send a survey to all undergraduate students after 10th day. We call it the Tommy check-in survey, asking them how their experience has gone so far. Those kinds of things aren't really something we want to create a custom object for, or we might have a triggering object where we want the data to come back. So what I did instead is I built a custom record type on case to house the data. And I put generic field labels and then another one, corresponding one for the response, and set up a few different data types. So I have some normal text fields where we can put responses, but then I also created some long text fields in case they have maybe longer questions that they're asking where they want a bigger response. And the nice thing about this is when we have those one-off surveys that come up, we can have them all feed to this this object or this record type of this object. And then we just differentiate for reporting used on like the dates, and we also use the subject. So in this case, this was the Statement of Student Responsibility survey that we sent out last year at the beginning of the school year, and it was for the DFC, which is our 2-year college. So if I wanted to pull a report of responses for that, I could do that based off of that subject and then go off of the date that it was submitted to get, narrow it down to a specific population. You could do the same thing using a custom object if you wanted to use a platform license for your users where they might not have access to cases. That might be a different option. For me, I was spinning it up really quickly. I had a really fast turnaround on something, and we use cases a lot, and that group that was going to be looking at the data for the most part has access to cases, so it was a good fit for us. But as we're transitioning to our new EDA org, we've talked about maybe moving this off of cases and putting it into a custom object. So some helpful resources. There's a lot of support out there, and the community for Salesforce extends to Qualtrics. So Qualtrics support is really helpful. You can reach out to them. You can contact them through your login, and then they'll either call you back or you can communicate through email. They have some pretty extensive documentation also, which is helpful. There's some things that are a little bit ambiguous, but for the most part, it walks you through the integration and how to do different things. For those where it was a little bit beyond, so like when we started getting into the JavaScript and the recoding and things like that, the Qualtrics community was extremely helpful. So I use them a lot, where again, you can go out and it's just a discussion board where people in the Qualtrics community can ask questions and other people respond. So in a lot of cases, nobody was doing exactly what we wanted to do, but I was able to get ideas and then take that back and figure out how we would do what we needed to do. And then the last one is the Ohana Slack. And I just discovered this one not too long ago. But if you aren't a member of the Ohana Slack, I highly recommend you go out and join. It's not just Qualtrics. You can search, you can do a keyword search and find there are quite a few posts about Qualtrics out there, but it's basically Salesforce admins and developers that go out there and post questions, and people respond like crazy. So it's a really great resource if you haven't gone out there. I highly recommend you join that. And with that, that's all for us, but I saw there were some questions.
That is right. Wow, you guys, I want to tell you, University of St. Thomas, you are awesome. The work that you've been doing, I don't know, today, the different presentations and just the way that you're going about this is just fantastic. So congratulations. We do have 3, now we have 4 questions. I think we have time for those questions. So they're in the Q&A. You start the first one from Robert, and it says, can you dynamically have the Salesforce pick list on a form?
I have not done this. I don't think it's available. And for the most part, I think we typically are presenting it in a different way than what we typically present our questions or our pick list values in Salesforce. So we've been doing more of the transforming of those values and sending it back to Salesforce. And really we're acting on it after the questions have been created and within Qualtrics, and we're doing that within the mapping. So I'm not aware of that, but I'll let Farrah respond to.
No, that's something that I've tried to play around with and see if we could do, and I haven't figured out how to do it. I bet if I really dug out in the community, I might be able to find something, but so far I haven't found that. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. So the next question is from Heather. If you had a survey with more sensitive data, health information, for example, how secure would this be with this process?
So I think that comes down to keeping a couple things in mind. First, anyone who has access to the survey in Qualtrics has access to the responses. So at St. Thomas, we do use Qualtrics for some confidential information surveys. So we have only one overall site admin that has access to everything. And so, even though we're doing response mappings and we're doing some admin-y stuff, we don't have access to all of Qualtrics on our campus. So we can't see anything that we haven't been granted access to. So you would want to limit access to the survey to only the people that you would want to give access to that data, right? The second piece to that is landing it in Salesforce. So again, you're going to want to rely on your security in Salesforce. So you could do a custom object with really limited permissions and try to manage it that way. But I guess it really depends on how you're using it, and you would have to set up those controls yourself.
Great, thanks, Farrah. All right, and from Chad, are you able to have surveys within an experience site and only authenticated site users can fill out the survey?
So we wouldn't show, it wouldn't be like an embedded form in the site. We can do links. So we use Experience for our applicants for our admissions. So anyone from admissions goes into an applicant portal, and we put all sorts of links there. So we could show a personalized link or a survey link to them there. They would still go to Qualtrics to actually fill out the survey. So it would take them to another web page or open a new browser tab for them to do the survey. So it's not exactly like it's embedded there, but you could have the personalized link show to them in the portal. They could click on that, go do the survey, and then when they submit the information back, if you have it mapped back to Salesforce, you could show them their responses on a page in the experience site. So I guess, again, it kind of depends on your use case and how you would do it, but it would still need to go to Qualtrics for them to actually fill it out. It would still need to open a separate tab. We could probably play with something to get it embedded in the page with frames or something, but that's not always a good thing. It's not a good user experience, especially for mobile.
And then we could pass the ID similar to what we're doing within our intranet. And we've got a lot of options there of what we could pull in, especially if they're authenticated or we've got those hooks onto their IDs and pieces like that.
Thank you both. All right, and from Kevin, is there a way to pass a link to the survey response summary into Salesforce?
I haven't seen that in the response mapping. You map the individual responses. I mean, I don't know. I haven't done that. I guess we're always mapping one-to-one responses to a record. So,
and I'm not sure if that's part of the embedded data. If we could have that survey, we really haven't been asked from our users to see it in Qualtrics after we move it into Salesforce, but I'm guessing that might be possible. It just hasn't been something we have used yet.
Awesome. And the last question, how do you manage who owns surveys and which user accounts are mapping to Salesforce on those surveys? So when a staff turns over, which survey mappings might be impacted?
We just ran into this. That's a great question. So my advice would be, if you're like us, make sure that anyone on your Salesforce team that's an admin, so for us, there's 4 of us, has access to that survey. So when I create a survey, if I'm the one creating it, I make sure that my teammates are able to access and make updates to that survey, just in case something happens. One thing about Qualtrics that because we just ran into this, so our former CRM director left the university and he had set up some of these surveys. We knew which ones they were. We were able to then contact our site admin and they can transfer ownership. So we did have to do that on a couple of surveys that he owned. So that's useful, that you can transfer the ownership and go in and make updates.
That's awesome. There's a message here from Robert Winter that answers an earlier question. It said, I wrote code for form assembly that mimics dynamic pick lists. Someone shared my code on GitHub. I'm sure you can use it in Qualtrics. Happy to share the link if you'd like. So thank you, Robert.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, this is what this is all about. So I just want to say thank you again. You guys, Farrah, you have been in every session. You've been either a crew member, a presenter. You win the award for being in the most of everything. So thank you for your support. Mike, it was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you again for your contributions. So we have one last session going on here, actually, because we have the closing session, and thanking everybody for being here. Looking forward to seeing you all in the future. This session and all the other sessions are going to be on a YouTube channel, and we will be emailing you this information next week. Thank you again, everybody, and good job. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.